Next up, for builds that can walk into any GM in the game and make it feel as easy as a regular strike, we have the Warlocks. And to be off meta for a moment, I'm going to suggest Solo Warlock. I know that nobody has ever thought of using that subclass before, but that's not what really makes this build anyway. What really matters is this thing. Aside from making the top of your head look like a whole ass runway, it also enables some of the best support in the game, allowing for heavy ammo spawns on all major and champion defeats for your team, and special ammo for yourself. But to achieve this effect, you need to be running a trace rifle. So I want to dedicate the first part of this video to them. There's a lot of options to choose from, including if it's worth it to run an exotic, or stick with a legendary. And if these weapons are easily obtained or even currently obtainable. With that in mind, here's what I would suggest. I'd give advantage to trace rifles in the kinetic slot, legendary options being Appetence and Incisor. Appetence is easy to obtain from seasonal activities, while Incisor is a bit more challenging coming from the Trials of Osiris. Appetence has some great high-end PvE options. I'd probably go with Overflow and One for All, as they are both easy to activate with this build. Incisor, while being more PvP focused, does have some interesting options. Slice is fantastic against champions or bosses, and can be paired with Hatchling or Target Lock. The fourth column isn't really too great, unfortunately. And the exotic options are Aegis Scepter and the Navigator. Both very strong. The Navigator's ability to apply woven mail while off-strand should not be underestimated. But obviously both have the inherent downside of taking up an exotic slot. With this build, it is quite a good idea to use an exotic primary, as this helps deal with red bar enemies effectively. Or if not, just using Dragon's Breath because it's just that good. As for energy slot trace rifles, there's a few standouts, but I'm less inclined to use one overall. Path of Least Resistance and some old rolls on the retrace path can roll with Shoot to Loot. An amazing peg to have on this build to pick up the spawn special ammo bricks. Path of Least Resistance can also pair with Volt Shot, which is great in its own right, but it is arc, and that does matter a lot this season. With all the benefits available to solar weapons, making it almost mandatory to run solar. Not the biggest fan of this really, but it's just the truth. There's artefact mods to grant Radiant, Scorch and Ignite for simply landing hits with solar weapons. That does however mean a retraced path roll with Shoot to Loot is absolutely top tier. But I would also wager maybe 1 or 2 people watching this video actually have it. If you don't, it's currently unobtainable. The other solar option, Acacia's Dejection, is quite potent, forensic with rewind rounds or reconstruction, but doesn't really hold up to the kinetic slot options, as you are missing out on a solar primary. As for the energy exotics, Divinity is pretty good if his overload champion's present, but again it is arc. Cold Heart, same story. Prometheus Lens doesn't really do enough to warrant an exotic, and the others are a bit of a meme. Overall, for most people, Appetence would be my go-to. Incisor if you can get a good roll on it and are utilising strand artifact mods. If you have a Shoot to Loot retrace path, and first of all I'm quite jealous, and it's also probably worth using. But anyway, that's enough yapping about trace rifles, since all you really need to do with them is quite simple to be honest. Laser a champion, mini boss or boss with 10 shots to mark them. This mark will last 10 seconds and can be refreshed with further shots. It's quite obvious to tell when this mark is active, as it's noted by the giant red X over the target. Teammates will see this too. As long as a fire team member gets a final blow on that target while this mark is active, this is what will spawn the ammo bricks. And these ammo bricks are what enable a GM to be completed with ease. Rocket spam would be the most common setup, and is very effective. And while it might make sense to run Gjallarhorn and go for a full support setup, I'd actually recommend against this. After all, it is your team getting all the heavy ammo spawns, not yourself. So really it should be one of those who should use Gjallarhorn. But if not, it is fine to use yourself. Under most circumstances though, a crafted Apex Predator is the best in slot heavy option. So that just leaves your primary option left. Shoot to Loot could be covered here. The kinetic slot has Rack and Tear as a legendary option, while the energy slot has it Priastonax, which is also solar. But there is one solar exotic primary, which I have seen absolutely everywhere in LFG groups. And I can tell this because it's like the loudest weapon in the game for some reason. And while I don't think it's quite as amazing as people are making it out to be, it's undeniably very strong and fits the build well. This of course being the Polaris Lance, and being able to, with solar artifact support, grant radiant and self-proc ignitions. This can stun both unstoppable and barrier champions. It is also very easy to use at a distance, and the repeated ignitions could even stun knock boss targets. And so, my overall recommended weapon setup is a Penance Polaris Lance Apex Predator. A bit of a slave to the meta, but also that's kind of the point. We're going for effective, and sometimes you just got to lean into it. And as for the build itself, it's full send into both the solar and support playstyles. Rather typical for a Well of Radiance Warlock. Healing rifts and grenades for sustain, aspects Touch of Flame and Icarus Dash, and a fragment combination of Ember of Ashes, Searing, Char and Mercy. These fragments together will spawn in a lot of fire sprites, which will grant grenade energy and restoration and pickup, meaning you can have additional levels of survivability. It also has options increasing and spreading scorch stacks, which will come easily using Polaris Lance or really any solar weapon this season. The artefact setup is also critical here. The mods you absolutely want to be running include Flint Striker, where rapid solar precision hits grant radiant, Kindling Trigger, while radiant, solar weapons apply scorch, Rays of Precision, while radiant, solar precision final blows cause an ignition, and Torch, while radiant, deal increased damage to targets affected by strand or stasis debuffs. And if you're running Incisor, be sure to also include the Unraveling Orbs, where picking up an Orb of Power grants strand weapons unraveling rounds, and Horde Shuffle, where unraveling targets spawn threadlings on sustained damage. The mod setup is also rather typical, so in the interest of saving time, I'll display the whole thing on screen now. The only things you will have to change from this is resist mods to match the surge of the current Nightfall. And finally, some additional high level tips. Heavy ammo is an almost infinite supply for your team, but not so much for yourself. To fix this, have a teammate run the Aeon Gauntlets with Effective Insight and have them finished marked champions. This will give enough heavy spawn that you can effectively use your rocket for everything. It's kind of ridiculous. Cenotaph itself is also stackable, meaning you could theoretically run an entire fire team with them and mark the same target. Just be aware that it's a final blow who decides who gets a heavy spawn, and you cannot land a final blow yourself and benefit from your own mark. It has to be a teammate. And with the additional special ammo bricks, double special is viable, though I recommend using an LMG as it's much more ammo efficient. I wouldn't recommend doing this unless you're playing with a very strong team, as if it does fall flat, you are in a really bad spot. Special ammo finisher could also be used. The solar subclass doesn't even have to be used, it's just the easiest. If you want fast clears, you can go with a more aggressive route such as Strand. The Navigator has some great synergies here, especially if you're playing with some Banner of War Titans who could utilise the grapple points it creates. And so, that's the build. Simple, but effective, and also heavily requested. Running this, you will have no issues getting into any GM clearing fire team, as your support makes the whole experience much easier. Thank you for watching.